In previous videos, we explored historical figures like the Buddha and Alexander the Great. By studying the major figures of the past, we can learn what the good life is and what the different kinds of excellence are. In history, we find individuals who devoted themselves to different ends, whether academic, spiritual, or political. One of these figures is Julius Caesar, someone whose legacy we can examine. Caesar is one of the great political and military leaders of history, similar to Napoleon and Alexander the Great. His life was a melodrama, engaged in efforts to transform Rome, socially and politically. Like a martyr, he was famously killed at the height of his career, like Philip II and Matthias Corvinus, dying too early before he could finish his legacy. The drama of his life led Shakespeare to write one of his best works about Caesar. Caesar is a pertinent figure for us to discuss in our time. Writers like John Glubb and Oswald Spengler, who devoted themselves to studying the life cycles of empires, might look at the United States today and argue we're transitioning, like the late Roman Republic under Caesar, toward a new, more authoritarian form of government as a part of an historical process. If we study the Rome of Caesar's time, we can find antecedents to our problems of today. We can see these cycles and use them to inform the present. According to Roman mythology, in deep antiquity, the city was founded by Romulus, from whom the city gets its name. Romulus and his brother Remus were two orphan brothers, raised in the wilderness by a she-wolf. Later in life, they became political figures and went on to found a city. A rivalry developed between them, which escalated, and Romulus ended up killing his brother. Thus we find the origins of Rome and a mythology of violence. Another tale examining the ancestry of the two brothers involves the character of the Iliad, Aeneas. In Homer's poem, the Greeks besieged Troy to fulfill Agamemnon's ambition, as well as to reclaim Helen, the abducted wife of Menelaus. One of the minor characters in the poem is the Trojan hero, Aeneas. When the city is destroyed, he's one of the few survivors to escape. The Romans had always admired the Greeks, feeling their own culture fell short of what the Greeks had achieved. Though the Romans built a stronger, more stable, and unified civilization than the Greeks, they failed to attain the same levels of scientific and cultural achievement. During the age of Augustus, one of the great poets of history, Virgil, sought to create an epic poem that could rival those of Homer. Using the tale of Odysseus as a template, the Greek hero and veteran of the Trojan War, having been sent on a long, laborious quest by the gods to return home, Virgil's Aeneas experienced the same. As a part of his travels, he descends into the underworld, a trope of heroic literature, and later meets and has an affair with Dido, the queen of Carthage. A star-crossed relationship, it ends with Aeneas leaving for Italy, and Dido cursing him and killing herself, foreshadowing the future wars between Rome and Carthage. After his travels, Aeneas makes his way to the Italian peninsula, where he becomes one of the distant ancestors of Romulus and Remus. In real history, Rome began as a small city-state in the Italian peninsula, emerging out of the Neolithic period, with no especially distinguishing characteristics. It was outshone in particular by the more prestigious and culturally advanced Etruscans to the north, as well as by the Greeks to the east. The city was originally a monarchy, passing from ruler to ruler, until the reign of the infamous king, Tarquin. Ruling around 500 BC, Tarquin is remembered as a tyrannical ruler, coming to power by crime, ruling through force, and unlawfully seizing his subjects' property and wealth. When his son, similar in character to him, committed a sexual assault against a member of the aristocracy, the virtuous daughter of the upper class, Lucretia, this was the final straw that resulted in a revolt in Rome. The people of the city, led by the figure Brutus, overthrew the monarchy and established a republic. Due to this foundational event, Rome developed a deeply internalized antipathy to the idea of kingship, similar to the United States, associating kings with misrule, tyranny, and the abuse of power. Though a republic of the Senate and people of Rome, in real terms, Rome was oligarchic in nature. Though all its subjects were in theory represented through the tribes, de facto power was consolidated in the Senate, which housed the oldest and most economically successful citizens of the state. Many of our modern political ideas date back to Rome. Vetoing, blocking a law from being passed, originates in the tribunes of the Roman Senate. The Romans also applied a concept of checks and balances in government. Rather than have one head of government, Rome was led by two consuls, the idea being that their rival ambitions would act as checks on each other's power. The Romans also practiced frequent elections, keeping their leadership dynamic and accountable, and preventing individuals from amassing too much power. Rome gradually expanded over the Italian peninsula, not only winning territory by conquest, but by forming alliances with other states. In theory, all Roman wars were defensive in nature, providing their conflicts with a sense of moral legitimacy. As a policy, the Romans would divide and conquer. They would enter an area, ally with the tribes who received them favorably, then await a political dispute to arise between their new allies and their ancient rivals. The Romans would use this as a casus belli to intervene and seize power. Many barbarians became auxiliaries, fighting for Rome in their wars. As time passed, these allies sought integration into Rome, and eventually being elevated into citizens. As we mentioned, the Etruscans were one of the major powers, who came under Roman rule. The Republic also went to war with their formidable southern neighbors, the Samnites, from whom they learned a great deal through hardship. As Rome expanded, it gradually came into contact with the state of Carthage, a mercantile power based in modern-day Tunisia or North Africa, which held colonies and dependencies throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Carthage had been founded by the Phoenicians, an ancient sea people based in Lebanon, famous for their alphabet, the metropolis of Tyre, which we discussed in a previous video, and their affluent purple dye. Around 200 BC, Rome and Carthage would fight in a series of destructive conflicts called the Punic Wars. Each time, Rome would emerge as the victor, yet following a truce, Carthage would reconstitute itself, each time seemingly as powerful as before. Carthage levied its most famous attack on Rome under the general Hannibal, who landed at Cartagena in modern-day Spain, then marched overland to Italy, crossing the Alps and bringing elephants with him to the peninsula. Carthage ravaged Italy and defeated the Romans at the Battle of Cannae, but failed to take the city due to its defenses. After years of struggle, the Romans disembarked in Tunisia, and after defeating the Carthaginians in battle, subjected them to a defeat of remarkable cruelty and humiliation. They destroyed everything so completely that they salted the earth, ensuring Carthage could never rise again or sow the soil to rebuild. Another famous rival of early Rome was the relative of Alexander the Great, the king of Epirus, Pyrrhus. Joined in a league to oppose the Romans, Pyrrhus came to Italy to support the states of Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece, against them. His battles put the Macedonian style of war, which we examined in detail in another video, against the developing Roman model, which emphasized the use of heavy infantry and defensive tactics. After a long, indecisive conflict, Pyrrhus retired to Greece, his name becoming the basis of the term Pyrrhic victory, a victory that comes at so great a cost it wasn't worth its sacrifices. As Rome rose, it gained much through plunder, though many of these benefits were concentrated in the hands of the few. Originally, Rome was divided into two classes, the patricians or upper class, and the plebeians or commoners. Long term, the elite became the holders of great estates, founded dynasties, and used their wealth to buy up more land and push increasing numbers of small farmers and property holders into the lower classes. When we study Rome, we find many of our modern political conflicts and movements have antecedents in their history. For examine the division between right and left and the idea of socialism. Responding to the challenge of economic inequality, the Gracchus brothers were the advocates of land redistribution in Rome. They became associated with a faction in Rome called the Populares, or Populace. They were opposed by the Optimates, the conservative and aristocratic elite. One way to view this is that the Populares were a movement for the common people's benefit, while the Optimates recall a Hamiltonian view of politics, believing only an educated elite should have power in government. This is where the interpretation of history sets in. The Optimates believed they were principled defenders of a republic, while the Populares viewed the state as an oligarchy that monopolized wealth and power in the hands of the few. Caesar himself lived around 50 BC, born into one of the prominent families of the republic. As he entered his 30s, Caesar rose to political office, serving as a high priest, consul, and governor. Yet he always felt he was invisible. Of great ambition, one anecdote of his life involved him reaching age 33, and weeping when he compared himself with Alexander the Great. Caesar felt at that age Alexander had already accomplished so much, and him so little. Thus we can find confidence in the life of Caesar that many of us are late bloomers. While assigned to govern the Roman province of southern Gaul in modern-day France, Caesar found an opportunity for glory. While other figures like Pompey won acclaim through their conflicts in the east, Gaul remained a territory the Romans might conquer. The Romans had a long rivalry with the Gauls, a Celtic people dating back to antiquity, when the Gallic warrior Brennus invaded and took Rome hostage, extracting a ransom and famously stating the line, "Vae victis," or woe to the vanquished. Here we encounter the idea of Caesarian dualism. Caesar is a unique figure as he can be interpreted in two ways. First, he can be viewed as a tyrant, as someone who sought to amass power for himself, as a criminal who started an illegal war, and who slaughtered innocent Gauls in his own vainglorious quest for celebrity. Second, he can be viewed as a champion of the people, someone who sought to redeem the common citizen of Rome against the depredations of the powerful, that he amassed power in an effort to vindicate the oppressed. He can also be viewed as a great political and military leader of history, like Napoleon. Ambiguity in his life is the origin of these two perspectives. Many actions of Caesar can be interpreted differently, depending on your political point of view. As governor, Caesar in theory had discretionary power, allowing him to take police action in Gaul as needed in defense of the allied tribes there. At the same time, to conduct a full invasion required authorization by the Senate, which Caesar did not receive. A pragmatist might look at his results and retroactively sanction them, but Caesar's jealous rivals in the Senate, whether motivated by envy and resentment or a desire to preserve the Republic, remained hostile to him. The life of Caesar fascinates because very different people have radically different interpretations of him. Dante was such a Caesarian that he put two of his killers, Brutus and Cassius, and the maws of Satan, at the bottom of the Inferno. Meanwhile, others, like the American founder Thomas Jefferson, believed Caesar represented the greatest danger of republics, a demagogue who seized tyrannical power. In Gaul, Caesar found himself at war with his hostile tribes, who came together in a coalition to oppose him. At the same time, some Gallic tribes allied with him, the Romans following the policy of divide and conquer. Caesar had his ultimate battle with the Gauls at Alesia. Here, Caesar had cornered the king of the Gauls, Vercingetorix. Yet the Romans found their numbers were insufficient to fully blockade him. Due to this, the Romans turned to one of their talents, engineering. Caesar's legion built a series of walls around the settlement where Vercingetorix had taken refuge, hemming him in. To complicate this story, a relief army of Gauls came to rescue Vercingetorix. Outnumbered, the Romans built a second set of walls facing out, This maneuver actually worked, and due to civilian suffering, fatigue, and starvation within the walls, Vercingetorix surrendered to the Romans. Gaul came under Roman rule, becoming a province of the Republic. Caesar compensated his veterans, ensuring their loyalty to him. One of his great lieutenants, Mark Antony, rose to power with him during this time. Caesar is one of the unique figures of antiquity because he produced a work written by himself, Commentaries on the Gallic Wars, which survives to the present. Showing us history from his perspective, in the work, Caesar tries to present events from an objective point of view. He provides demographic data, morally justifies his invasion, presents the Gauls as barbaric, and shows the Romans as on a civilizing mission. While in Gaul, Caesar engaged in 2 other adventures. He was the first Roman to cross the Rhine River, venturing into the region of Germania. He also crossed the Channel and stepped foot in Britannia, encountering the Britons before again withdrawing. Though he didn't conquer these regions, these adventures added to his mystique back in Rome, similar to Napoleon's expedition to Egypt or Alexander's campaign into India. In Rome, the main leaders of the populares were Caesar and Mark Antony. Meanwhile, the most famous of the Optimate politicians was the arch-conservative Cato. Previously, Caesar had dominated politics in Rome through the so-called triumvirate, an alliance between him and 2 other figures, the war hero of the East, Pompey, and the wealthy Crassus. When this alliance fell apart, Cato led the movement to censure Caesar for his unauthorized invasion of Gaul. With the Optimates in power in the Senate, they took increasing steps to punish Caesar. These escalated and ultimately resulted in being branded a fugitive to Rome. A key figure during this time was Cicero, who was a Roman statesman, writer, and philosopher. In the Senate, Cicero sought to maintain the integrity of the Republic, but at the same time treaded a line of moderation between the factions of Caesar and Cato. Caesar was technically owed what the Romans called the triumph, a large celebration that commemorated the general's victories on the battlefield. However, Caesar was simultaneously branded a traitor by Cato's faction in Rome, putting him in a politically difficult situation. Caesar attempted to negotiate, but this process failed, and with few options left, he decided to march on Rome with an army. This is the famous event of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. This phrase, which refers to crossing a point of no return, comes from a tradition of the Republic. Generals returning to Rome were supposed to leave their armies on the Rubicon River. This ensured the integrity of the government, meaning a popular military leader couldn't use his soldiers' personal loyalty to him to seize power. By breaking this, Caesar rolled the dice of destiny to decide his fate. Yet as his army approached Rome, the Optimates fled, with Cato and his ally Pompey fleeing to Greece. This left the capital to Caesar himself, a major symbolic defeat for his rivals. Caesar proclaimed himself dictator, an emergency position that existed in Rome. This role existed for times of crisis and temporarily gave an individual total power over the state. The idea, however, was to only use this position for short-term need, and that after the crisis, those given the title were supposed to return power back to the Senate, similar to Cincinnatus, a famous model of Republican virtue. The Latin term rex, or king, associated with Tarquin, was maligned in Rome. However, the military term imperator, our basis for the word emperor, developed into a new monarchical title. It would come to refer to the position held by Caesar, Augustus, and their successors. With the Optimates in exile, Caesar turned to legislation. His new laws included a redistribution of land to veterans and the poor, a populist aspiration that dated back to his uncle Marius and the Gracchus brothers. He expanded citizenship to many of the Gallic allies who had assisted him in his conquest of Gaul. He established the Julian calendar, bringing us nearly to our modern one. Ultimately, the months of July, after Julius Caesar, and August after Augustus were added. the numbers of the months were changed, with October becoming the 10th month and December the 12th. Previously, Cato had expanded the grain dole, the welfare system in Rome, to an unsustainable level, wanting to bankrupt the state and force the populares to make the unpopular move of cutting it. In power, Caesar did this, reducing it to a sustainable level. While many optimates fled, other prominent Romans, like Cicero and the figure Brutus, remained in the city. As controversy over Caesar rose, however, most who favored institutionalism and the rule of law defected to join the forces of the Republic. In the subsequent civil war, Caesar defeated the forces of the optimates, led by Pompey at Thessaly in Greece. Pompey then fled to Egypt, where he was killed by the Ptolemies, the ruling family, who presented his head to Caesar. Though they solved his problem, Caesar was revolted by the deed, recalling his long friendship with Pompey. Caesar's other rival, Cato, ended up isolated and alone in North Africa, later committing suicide there. Triumphant, Caesar made the crucial decision not to be vengeful but clement, to offer a general amnesty to anyone who had opposed him. However, a conspiracy developed, instigated by Cassius, who had a lean and hungry look, and Brutus, like a son to Caesar, who joined the plot, recalling his ancestor who overthrew Tarquin. Caesar's increasingly autocratic power caused alarm. In Shakespeare's play, he presents a scene where Caesar and Mark Antony are in Rome before a crowd. At an act of political spectacle, Mark Antony repeatedly offers Caesar a crown. Caesar rejects it, but demonstrates his immense de facto, if not formal, power, and observes if the people would accept him assuming the position of a monarch. Allegedly, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of his assassination, and was so worried by this premonition, she convinced her husband not to go to the Senate. This actually spooked the conspirators, who for a time thought Caesar had figured out the secret of their plot. Caesar's assassination occurred on the Ides of March, when he was attacked and stabbed to death by a group of senators. As he fell, Shakespeare noted his final words, as E tu, Brute, looking at the young man he had viewed as a son, joined in the plot to kill him. Caesar's assassins made a crucial error in killing him, underestimating his level of popular support. The common people of Rome viewed him as a war hero and an advocate for the lower classes, while the elite still viewed the Republic as noble and politically functional. The common people had become cynical and disenchanted, viewing it as a tool to maintain oligarchy, not the liberties of the people. From their long disdain for monarchy, the Romans had become pragmatic, looking for a demagogue who might bring real political change. After Caesar's death, his will left most of his estate to his nephew Octavian, the future Augustus, posthumously adopted as his son. This provoked some envy in Mark Antony, who also viewed Caesar as a paternal figure. Caesar left a part of his wealth to the people of Rome. This last gesture affirmed him as a popular figure and caused a surge in support for him after his death. Caesar's death harmed the fragile stability he had achieved after defeating the Optimates in the Civil War. With Mark Antony presiding over Caesar's funeral, his speech won over the masses who, after his performance, turned hostile to the conspirators. After the death of Caesar, Rome would suffer 2 more civil wars before returning to a stable government. The first of these involved the Caesarians, led by his lieutenant Mark Antony and adopted heir Octavian, defeating the insurgent faction of Republicans, led by Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius. After this, Rome regained a fragile state of order, with a new triumvirate, including Mark Antony and Augustus, dominating its politics. This increasingly authoritarian government turned to fear to solidify its power. It implemented a purge, called the Prescriptions, which seized the property of and executed many prominent Romans. The most famous victim of this purge was Cicero, who, though formerly friendly with Caesar, was ordered executed by Mark Antony. Since the death of Caesar, Cicero had become Mark Antony's most vehement critic, giving a series of speeches condemning him called the Philippics, recalling those Demosthenes had made against Philip II in Greece. The death of Cicero marked a major turning point in Roman history. Free speech and political integrity were dealt a crucial blow, representing the transition of the Republic toward an authoritarian model. After the proscriptions, Augustus was given Italy to rule over, while Mark Antony was awarded the rich provinces of the east. Mark Antony then married Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemies, and attempted to create a kind of monarchic version of the Roman state in the Hellenic world. Yet Augustus brought this ambition to the Senate and viewed it as a betrayal of Rome's virtue, or virtus, to the malign temptations of the East. After their falling out, Augustus and Mark Antony ended up in yet another civil war. While Augustus had little talent for military command, he had a skill at delegation and appointed the talented commander Agrippa to lead his forces. Following a decisive battle off of the coast of Greece at Actium, Augustus emerged triumphant politically. Mark Antony and Cleopatra met their ends in Egypt, the kingdom annexed into the Roman state. With the rise of Augustus, at last came the age of the Pax Romana, the period of peace under the hegemony of the Romans. The economy developed significantly in this time, resulting in increased prosperity for the public. If we observe what happened after Augustus, we find that both the Caesarians and their rivals were correct. A problem of personal leadership is its dependence on the individual character of the ruler. While Caesar ingratiated himself with the public and had great charisma, the privileged Augustus was at first cruel and alienating, only learning to be just after being taught moderation by his Caesarian supporters. After Augustus, the quality of Roman leadership declined, leading to the famous misrules of figures like Nero and Caligula. Later, those not born in the purple, those who gained the emperorship by adoption, showed the potential of the form of government. These are known as the 5 good emperors, identified by Machiavelli in The Prince. One argument is that as a state expands, internal pressures for order compel republics to transform into authoritarian regimes. This was one of the initial fears of the American founding fathers, that a large republic like the United States would be unable to function, a democratic system only possible in small states like Athens. Another argument is that as wealth and quality increases in mature republics, an increasingly frustrated lower class looks to an authoritarian figure to reform the government. This is one of the applications of this narrative to the present. In previous videos, we looked at the Buddha and Alexander the Great. We find Caesar fits in this category of figures of great ambition and apotheosis. To his supporters, Caesar represents a rare archetype, an individual who sought great power to wield it in support of the public. While his critics would oppose this view, the longevity of Caesar's legend and history shows the prevalence of this perspective of him. Finally, while Caesar's death is different from that of Christ, his assassination represents a kind of secular martyrdom, distinguishing him as one of the most iconic and dramatic figures of history.